In 2003, Ridley Scott released Alien, the director's cut, a new version of his classic film originally released in 1979. While both cuts are similar enough, the director's cut is a meticulous re-edit that gives the first act of the film a faster pace, and of course newly added scenes appear throughout. The 2003 version was given a limited theatrical release, and has pretty much become a standard available version to watch on home video. Today I'm going to be exploring the differences in the director's cut. This won't be a change-by-change, scene-by-scene examination of the differences, since many of the changes are actually cuts from the film. Certain scenes have been tightened, and some shots and even some dialogue is left out, all mostly within the first hour of the film. And as I'll get to later, not all these omissions were good. In comparing these two versions, I'm going to be looking at the key new scenes and changes in the new version, and how it overall affects the movie. So without any further ado, let's take a closer look at Alien, the director's cut. In the theatrical version of Alien, the transmission sent from the derelict ship that caused the Nostromo to land on LV-426 and essentially sent the entire plot in motion was a mystery and was never heard. By us, the viewers, anyway. But in this director's cut version, there's a newly added scene where the crew listens to the transmission, hearing chilling, indecipherable noises that leave them perplexed and a little shook. The scene is basically an extension of the breakfast scene, picking up right after the conversation about the obligation to investigate the planet. You can see Ripley still working on her coffee, and Dallas chewing on something. And it has the same casual nature as the breakfast scene, though it does have an ominous undertone when we hear the transmission. It's a good scene, but probably the biggest reason this scene may have been left out in the first place is that maybe the transmission is best left to the imagination. Ultimately, actually hearing it doesn't really move the plot forward in any way. They're unable to interpret it, so especially in the original theatrical version, you can see why it was scrapped and how removing it got the plot to the planet all that much faster. But I think with this tighter pace, in this new version, it doesn't feel like that much of an issue. I don't think it hurts or helps the movie in one way or another, but I liked seeing it restored, if only to see more of the crew's interactions in the scene, as it becomes just a little more clear that they're heading into a situation they're not prepared for. This is a brief new moment integrated into the film, but it offers a little more insight into the Nostromo's crew and what they had available, as well as, I think, just adding a little bit more to the Kane character, played by John Hurt. When Kane is in the egg chamber of the derelict ship, he approaches an egg, reaches out to it, and is startled by a noise it makes, which gives him a little bit of pause. Then, of course, he's face-hugged, later unknowingly bringing an alien parasite aboard the Nostromo, but in this version, he shows just a little more caution, and actually pulls out a weapon, a little blaster that he guards himself with. Eventually he lowers it and the scene continues as normally, but as brief as it is, I do appreciate its inclusion in this cut of the film. It shows a little bit more in showing that Kane wasn't completely reckless, and it's interesting to know the crew did have other weapons available to them other than the flame units. Not that they would do much good in deep space against a creature that can bleed acid through several decks of a ship within seconds. Before Ash opened the airlock, letting Captain Dallas, Lambert, and an unconscious Kane with a facehugger attached to him into the ship, Ripley had a standoff with her captain over quarantine protocol. Ripley wisely warned of the risk of contamination, having authority while Dallas was off the ship refused to open the doors. They got in anyway, of course, because of Ash, but Ripley was straight up willing to let them die outside of that ship. While things definitely get very worse very quickly for the crew, it seems maybe just a little strange that neither Dallas or Lambert bring this up, or even show some kind of resentment for Ripley's decision. In the director's cut, this is acknowledged. When Kane is brought in under observation as the rest of the crew looks on, Ripley comes down and is confronted by Lambert, seeing her for the first time since getting back on the ship. She runs right up to her and even slaps her across the face. Lambert expresses what probably would be on most people's minds. She left them out there to die. How dare she? And even Dallas chimes in through the comm, demanding his orders to be followed. While again, things do get much worse, and there are bigger problems to follow, this new scene resolves this little fact hanging over the characters, and it does so very naturally. That fits in perfectly with the pace of the movie. I think it is included at just the right moment between conflicts presented in the plot. I think it's a beneficial scene, and I don't think it should have been cut to begin with. It might not be the most talked about scene from the director's cut, but I do think it's one of the best additions.
Just tell me how you can leave that kind of decision to him.
Look, I just run the ship. Anything that has to do with the science division, Ash has the final word.
How does that happen?
It happens, my dear, because that's what the company wants to happen.
Since when is that standard procedure?
Standard procedure is to do what the hell they tell you to do.
Did you ever ship out with Ash before?
I went out 5 times with another science officer. They replaced him 2 days before we left Thetis with Ash.
I don't trust him.
I don't trust anybody. What's happening with the repairs? How's it going?
Oh, they're pretty much finished now.
As you can see, the difference between cuts here isn't anything newly added, but something that was unfortunately taken away. This scene takes place before the Nostromo leaves LV-426, when Ripley is having a conversation with Dallas about Ash's responsibility regarding the parasite and the ship's preparations to take off. The director's cut version omits some dialogue from the original cut where Ripley tells Dallas she doesn't trust Ash, and Dallas tries his best to assure her. It seems like almost an arbitrary cut that doesn't really affect the scene much, but I would say it is a noticeable enough cut for those very familiar with the original. It's just a little bit of dialogue cut, but I think we really miss out on a lot just through removing this brief exchange. For one thing, I think this is the only time in the film where it's mentioned out loud that the Nostromo is leaving from Thetis, except for maybe an earlier scene on the bridge where it's barely audible, but maybe a fact worth knowing. It's also revealed in this exchange that Ash was a last-minute replacement as science officer. Ash, of course, is revealed to be an android working in the interest of the evil company WEYLAND, so the implication here is that the company may have been anticipating the Nostromo to be returning to Earth on a course of interest, and they wanted someone there on their side in case contact was made, and of course it was. Removing this little detail makes the company's involvement just a little bit more ambiguous. And for what it's worth, the exchange about trust is actually echoed in Alien Resurrection, with Call and Christie repeating the lines. But with these lines missing from the director's cut of the first film, it's completely meaningless when referenced in the fourth, for what it's worth. Maybe Ridley Scott felt it was the best choice to keep the company's plans more ambiguous. Maybe he felt that Ripley explicitly saying she didn't trust Ash was a little too on the nose, and it was already obvious that she had suspicions about him. Or maybe it was all just dialogue Scott cut and didn't think twice about, but deemed it unnecessary in moving the plot along to the iconic chestburster scene, which at this point in the film is fast approaching. I personally don't agree with this change, whatever the reason for the decision may be, and it's unfortunate to have it left out in this version. Brett's death scene is the first time we see the full-grown alien in the film, so it was a scene that had to be done just right, especially in 1979 when this is a completely new monster that no one had ever seen before. So how much do you show? What's just enough to catch a glimpse of the beast in the dark while letting your mind fill in the rest? With the theatrical cut, I think they got it just right, but with the 2003 version being so many years later with so many people aware of the movie and the monster, the pressure to surprise in the same way they did in 1979 was alleviated a little bit. At its core, the scene is the same, and generally has the same effect, but with some new footage added. Notably, there's a shot when Harry Dean Stanton is refreshing himself with some dripping water, and we see the alien hanging in the chains above, motionless. I think it's a very cool shot, and very eerie to know the alien is just waiting there and stalking Brett, so it definitely adds to the scene. But at the same time, if this were my first time watching the movie, I'd maybe almost sort of feel like they gave away the surprise too early. But I suppose that is the benefit of these kinds of alternate cuts. We get the new interesting additions that even add further dimension to the movie and its scenes and characters. But it may be stuff that just doesn't work in the original version, and is probably only best to watch if you've already seen the original. I think the first reveal of the alien in this cut is a good example of that. It's great to see it in this new version, but I think it might have been a mistake to leave it in back in 1979, if that makes sense. Also, a notable change to this scene is the way it ends. In the theatrical version, the alien comes down, attacks Brett, and snatches him away, ending with a shot of Jonesy, the ship's beloved cat, looking on. In the director's cut, Ripley and Parker come running in, calling to Brett after hearing his screams. They look up into the chains, and drops of Brett's blood come dripping down, and Parker drops the cattle prod in shock. The scene still does end with the shot of Jones, though. The 1979 version of the scene worked perfectly at the time, but this is also something interesting to see in an alternate cut, and to its credit, seeing Ripley and Parker at the end of the scene, I think bridges better into the next scene. Parker mentions the size of the creature, and a viewer of the theatrical cut may wonder just how and when he saw the alien. Now knowing he showed up immediately after the attack and looked up into the chains, maybe just quick enough to catch a glimpse, this makes a lot more sense. I like both versions of the scene, and I think they each work well within their own cuts. The director's cut tweaks it, sure, but the scenes still maintain the shock that it promises to deliver upon. Considering there was so much more filmed and left out of this scene than what appears in the director's cut, such as a moment where Brett starts growling at the alien as it slowly reaches out to him and seems to crush his head, this 2003 version is a good compromise between footage that would be interesting to reintroduce and footage that would too severely alter the scene. I think Scott made the right decision in including just a little bit more in this scene and giving us some good news stuff, but not going too overboard with it. Alien's cocoon scene almost needs no introduction. It's just about the holy grail of deleted scenes, long discussed and dissected well before any director's cut was released. Once becoming the last surviving member of the crew, Ripley discovers Dallas, still alive, cocooned to the wall, and in the first stages of some kind of horrific transformation into an alien egg. There's also Brett, who may very well be in the last stages of this transformation. It's a fascinating and chilling scene, and director's cut or not, I've always considered it part of the movie, even if for a time unofficially. So to see this infamously missing scene finally get its official inclusion in the 2003 cut is something worth celebrating as a fan. I love this inclusion, and it's another scene I feel should have never been cut to begin with. It alters the pace a little bit, but I think it's nice to have a little bit of a breather scene before the next scenes that are very urgent and fast-moving, with Ripley literally running for her life. The cocoon scene is a quiet and calm scene meant to creep rather than thrill, but I think it transitions to the next scene nicely by having the emotionally charged moment of Ripley setting the cocoon ablaze. This puts the adrenaline back up as the calm moves toward complete panic before Ripley escapes to the shuttle. Needless to say, this is probably the biggest draw of the director's cut and one of the main reasons to watch this version. I think leaving the cocoon scene out was a major mistake to begin with, and thankfully that's corrected in the director's cuts. It's right back where it should be. This change is literally no more than maybe 1 second of added footage, but it could completely change the entire movie, depending on how you interpret it. I've always been fascinated by what Ridley Scott has had to say in specific regard to Jones the cat. From what I understand of certain things he said in interviews and on commentaries, he wanted to, at least back in 1979, subtly, subconsciously communicate to the audience that there's some connection between Jones and the alien. That maybe they're working together somehow, and Jones is leading victims to the alien, which may very well have happened in the case of Brett, who knows. But according to Scott, the audience was meant to believe, in the final act of the film, Sigourney Weaver was going to be the next to die because she went off alone to find the cat, thus making it all more surprising when it's the Ripley character who turns out to be the survivor. But we're still left to wonder, I suppose, about this cat. There's a scene where Ripley leaves Jones behind after a close call with the alien, and we see the creature staring at the cat in his little travel cage. Is it a look of fascination? Does it think Jonesy is food? What happens between seeing the alien alone here with the cat and when Ripley gets Jones back? Did the alien do something to it? Did it infect it? These questions may have been asked by audiences back in 1979, but today we know better. The final twist had nothing to do with the cat. The alien was hidden in the shuttle's machinery all along. And we know Jones is a good guy. He wouldn't work with the alien. He's a little shithead, sure, but he's good at heart. So this new footage is an alternate shot of that moment with the alien observing Jones, only in this version it ends with the alien violently knocking the cage away. No further interest in the cat, nothing insidious going on here, unless you're an animal lover. So I think that literally with one foul swoop, Scott put that little subtext to rest. This subconscious suggestion posed to the audience in 1979 may have worked well then, but considering Ripley's survived for 3 sequels, I don't think it's much of a surprise that she makes it out alive of this one. So if you've ever happened to believe that Jones and the alien may have been working together, well, maybe this addition to the director's cut may change your mind. Having 2 different versions of Alien is really just more of an already great thing. The original 1979 film will always be the definitive version of the film, and the director's cut is an alternate choice. Scott himself has made it pretty clear in interviews and DVD introductions that he's perfectly happy with the original film and doesn't necessarily consider the director's cut to be an improvement, but he was glad to revisit the film and make these changes just the same. And I'm all for directors going back and retooling their films, just as long as the originals are always available, of course. I think that's important. Nothing can ever take away the original film, but I like that we have an alternate cut. Quite frankly, I'm still really curious about many other deleted and alternate scenes and shots that never made it into either cut. And I'd actually even really be interested in seeing a 3rd version of the film, just to see how they could work these scenes into the movie and if they could be successful in doing so. I'd be especially interested to see if they could somehow work in, re-edit, and maybe digitally finish the infamous airlock scene. But that's a whole other story. I made an entire video looking at that scene, so if you are interested in checking that out, I'll leave it on the end screen. Either way, the original version of Alien is the original. It's the movie that was unleashed into the world 40 years ago, and has been scaring audiences ever since. It's not going anywhere. It will always be the definitive version of the film, and personally it is my preferred version, although maybe over the years I've just seen it so many times, and I'm so familiar with it that, honestly, every time I decide to watch Alien, I actually do usually go to watch the director's cut. It is October, and prime horror movie season, meaning a lot of people will be watching Alien this year, as it always tends to make lists of scariest movies ever made, and rightly so, and for fans any old time is a good time to give it a watch. But my question to you is this: when you watch Alien, which version do you usually find yourself choosing? The original or the director's cut? Comment below, I'm curious to know. And as always, I'd like to thank you very much for watching today. I really appreciate it, and if you enjoyed this video, please make sure to give it a like, and you can also subscribe for all the latest videos from Alien Theory. A very, very special thanks goes out to WEYLAND YUTANI executives, EmYarUk and Lady Anne, part of the Patreon Hive. If you'd like to join the Hive and support the channel, check out my Patreon page for exclusive posts and contests. In the meantime, you can catch up with Alien Theory over social media. Follow @alien_theory on Twitter and @alientheoryyt on Facebook and Instagram for more. And until next time, this is Alien Theory, signing off.